It's another Manly Monday, and this Manly Monday, we are talking about shame. And this comes from me sitting with the shit show that was last week surrounding She-Hulk. But that's the thing about me. For people who are new to the channel, who are here to hate watch, hello. Hopefully you stay anyway. Because I do not take things like that personally. I know it's not about me. I tend to. I am a systemic thinker and I am at my core science minded. And sometimes I know I'm like, ooh, let's poke it and see what it does. Ooh, it didn't like that poking. And then I sit with it and try to figure out what was going on. You know, you get some distance, you unpack it, you have some conversations. And that's what's leading me to talk about shame. Because I map conversations, I map reactions. That's part of the work I do with It's Not Therapy and Leanna Cares. I look for patterns in speech and decision making and assumptions, and I track them back. And that's what I tracked back a lot of because guys I super respect got triggered by the first episode of that show. Now, the thing I like about the guys I personally know is that they all had a slightly different reaction to it, as opposed to that same kind of came out of a mold or came out of a factory, which indicates there's some widely watched YouTube video, there's some subreddit that fueled that. I'm much more interested when something seems organic and personal, because then I'm like, okay, I can take the different reactions and then overlap them and see what the common factors are. So if you like this sort of stuff, help support this channel. Sorry, I'm coughing. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Patreon helps a lot with a lot of things. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK. There is one gentleman who is on the waiting list for a one-on-one session. He can't afford it, so he's having to deal with the free mental health supports that come through the government, and they're just not working for him. So it would be great to give him my methods and see how they work for him. Because shame. All right. Shame is a thing that holds everyone back. And I think that, the way people who don't know me, I went to the same women's studies program as Anita Sarkeesian. We had radically different outcomes from that. I was like, this is all bullshit. And I went and made my own theories. She made a lot more money. But one of the things I really chafed at was treating masculine and feminine like blocks, like bricks, right? And this idea of toxic masculinity and toxic femininity and patriarchy and matriarchy. And the problem is that these are fine as pure concepts. People who are new don't know my intense distaste for Immanuel Kant. So whenever we start talking about pure abstractions with like pure reason, right, this, that, and the next, I have real issues with Immanuel Kant. So I tend to go more Foucault's. You guys don't care about this shit. A lot of the Stoics for me. But one person I follow, not as much as I'd like, but I do have a hell of a lot of respect for, is Brene Brown. And she does stuff about shame. And I sort of peeked in there. And Brown's idea of shame is that there's something fundamentally wrong with me, that I'm unworthy of love. Shame wrecks self-esteem. And if it goes on deep enough and it goes on long enough, it turns into self-contempt. Now, that doesn't mean that the shame has to be this big traumatic single event. It can be a death by 1,000 cuts throughout life. This cardboard standee of, in the case of men, because this is Manly Mondays, a cardboard standee of masculinity that you're constantly compared to, and you feel like you measure short. And after a while, this internalizes and breaks down that sense of who you are as an individual. Because I would add, she goes self-esteem, to self-contempt. I go self-esteem, but then it starts getting your self-concept. And then you just get this contempt of this, I don't know, something. Because I have numerous clients who, lock up when I say, what do you want? What will make you happy? Define yourself. Give me 3 good qualities. That's not a lack of self-esteem. That's a lack of self-concept, right? Even if somebody thinks they're a complete piece of shit, they should be able to tell you what they want. But when somebody doesn't know what they want, when someone can't verbalize that, to me, that's shame. And we have to first reconstruct the sense of self, that self-concept, before we can begin to create self-esteem through little victories, little tiny tests of the self-concept. They get a good result. They get validation. You can't like yourself unless you know yourself. And so many people seem so torn down, and it manifests in that hyper reactivity we saw with She-Hulk episode 1. Now, of course, for people who haven't watched episode 2, she actually says, I was wrong when I told Bruce that I could just sideline the She-Hulk. So the show right there is going, nope, she was wrong there. He was right. And then he's super supportive, water under the bridge. I'm like, I love you. I love you, Bruce Banner. I love you, Hulk. But yeah, I mean, there's a reason for that, right? Because that version of Smart Hulk, of Professor Hulk, is obviously reflecting my own journey from feeling like I have to fight everything to recognizing, no, if you can't absorb the punches, it's better to do it. The Hulk has every reason to be in the world to be the bigger person, because he's a very big guy, right? And this is where we get into these uniquely masculine shame, right? Because guys are trying to perform masculinity while not feeling like a real man. And therefore the shame gets worse and worse and worse and piles up. And so all that performance of masculinity is done through self-contempt. It's done through a lens of self-contempt. And women do it too. Look at the bulk of the feminist movement. Okay, for those of you, again, who are new, I self-describe as a feminist, but I created my entire own structure for the whole thing, something I call mosaic feminism. That instead of thinking of masculinity as a construct and femininity as a construct, they're collections of individual experiences. So thanks, phone. You're stepping on my big build line. Thanks. But instead of it being, this is the thing, and we all exist in that thing. We tend to talk a lot about spaces, right? I'm like, no, the thing is actually a collection of individuals. So you got the big picture, but then all the individual tiles, right? And some tiles can have a pattern on it. Some tiles can be totally red or totally blue or totally green or totally white, right? But they all make up the picture. And the difference between me and standard intersectional feminism and now moving into the work with masculinity, instead of it being comparison to an archetype, it's where do you fit on the board? What's an archetype that we can put you in to get the expectations people have of you matching with your authentic self? Because for me, all the female archetypes just made me feel like shit. They all just made me feel like shit. I couldn't be any of that. I couldn't. And I mean, some of you see my cosplay, they're like, what? That's performance. That's not identity, right? I don't find a lot of female characters validating. They don't reward my inner self. And you'll see the stuff in my background. There's like the Spectre and Plastic Man, and like there's a lot of dude back there. The big Captain America shield right there. I got Captain Canuck. I got like there's a lot of dude back. There's a MODOK. Now people know who the fuck that is. Iron Giant, so on and so forth. And I let go of the shame of not conforming to what you're supposed to be. And you still have to work within it, but you can see it as an inconvenience instead of a failure. And I've really been sitting with how to do it for men. I've been doing it one-on-one and getting some success with individual clients, but what's a message, broad scale, like big picture, the whole picture, that can be challenging yet affirming instead of just shameful? We have language within feminism that increasingly is not working, but at least it's common terms. It's on the men's side, it's either red pill shit or borrowed concepts that just don't work because, I lecture at a college about gender in game design, and I, my takeaway, hey, you're getting free education. Don't think about gender as an aesthetic. Don't think about gender as a space. Think about it as a gameplay mechanic, because it's something people have to move through. It's something people have to work with. And we're all going through life right now with sluggish controls and wonky hitboxes and just, it's unresponsive. We're not communicating our player intent in the game. And that's where the shame comes from, right? Because people see that as a me problem instead of this game is busted, right? This is fucking broken. Joy-Con drift. The fuck? This is bullshit, right? And that's I think that this game is bullshit is where these reactions come from regarding so-called feminist media, right? Hear me out, okay? Because this is something I first noticed as a games journalist. I got run at a pretty much every major website except The Escapist. They appreciated me. You guys know I'm still in touch with Alex McCrease until this day. Because when he was running the ship, Alex didn't feel the need to talk about his own experience through women's issues. And I noticed when I'd pitch to, I won't name names, but if you look up my stuff, hey, maybe they've scrubbed it. Who knows? But I can't find the article I wrote from the National Post anymore. I'd always notice that male editors would want to insert their opinions into my pieces because they were passionate about it, right? And I'd be like, no, this isn't your experience. This is my experience. This is about, what it comes with having the female control scheme, right? You don't get to invert the y-axis, sir. No. But what I realized is these guys were trying to shoehorn their own issues, their own struggles by defending women because talking about their own pain was seen as a shameful act. Now, the problem with this is that one of the things that increases shame is not being able to talk about the things that are making you uncomfortable and you think might be weird or different about you, right? Not being able to talk about that takes, I do something weird or I did something even bad. And it turns into something about me is wrong. There's a difference between doing a bad thing and doing a wrong thing, right? Bad boy got a bit of a sheen on it. Wrong boy, no, bad, right? Wrong. There's a greater charge on wrong. And She-Hulk, without intending to, hit nerves that I don't think the creators understood, because there are very few people who can, look at clouds from both sides now. I went there instead of getting to swap our places. I can't sing Kate Bush. Can't keep running up that road, but that's what the song's about, right? It was originally supposed to be called The Deal with God, and it was about swapping places between men and women to understand each other better. And there's very few people who have enough experience in both types of spaces. Female sports reporters get to spend time in men's locker rooms. If you work in theater, you're in those sort of, the sex segregation of spaces gets kind of blown to the water. I mean, let's face it, a lot of those guys are gay anyway. Who gives a shit, right? But yeah, it's the we think about the locker room and in some ways the gym and all that stuff. There's very few women who have experiences just being able to observe the same way, men don't tend to know what it's like to be in a crowded ladies' room. Something I kept pushing back with was She-Hulk. But, that's why I'd prefer to minimize sex segregated spaces. I get why they're a thing. Not everybody is as comfortable with shit as I am. But, it increases the divide. It decreases the understanding. And one of the big things that is unique to men is that there is more shame. There is a more charged atmosphere regarding talking about feelings, admitting vulnerability, admitting fears, and I think part of it is the way, and I don't think this is conscious, and I know people will argue with me, but the way Jen was just out with it in that scene. And it hit a button. It hit a shame button in a lot of guys that they didn't see mirrored in Bruce Banner. And mirror neurons are this thing. And I am not saying this is true. This is just my working theory based on the way shame works. And it is not a criticism of anybody if this is what happens, this is the core of the problem. And it's really important to understand the core of the problem so we can do something about that. Because, you know, Professor Hulk / Smart Hulk is a dude who's overcome his shame. He's overcome the deep trauma that made him split into, at that time, it was 3 different people. Well, one person, and then, you know, Joe Fixit, and I forget Green Hulk's name right now. But I related to that because I've had to do a lot of work overcoming shame. And that was one of the things, these gendered paradigms are awful for overcoming shame because they insist women just default victim. The proper way to do it is victim, which has shame, right? Every positive trope we have in feminism, the girl boss, right? The girl boss is the big one right now. Or sort of in order to be strong, there must be a sacrifice of femininity. And that's fucking toxic. But we don't talk about toxic femininity. We talk about toxic masculinity. But I've talked before about how toxic masculinity is toxic because it just seems like it's increasing the shame. It's keeping that spin cycle of there's this ideal I'm just not measuring up to. And it's this death by 1,000 cuts every day. I mean, I found this website about men's issues and they list things that erode men's self-esteem. And this may stun you because I know this is not a sports ball crowd, but men are shamed when they can't remember the names of guys on their local NFL, NBA, or MLB teams. I guess that means it'd be the same if you kind of screw up a name in a game. Like, you know, you confuse Ryu and Ken or something like that. More on that in a bit. When they don't have a good sense of direction, okay? When they can't describe what's wrong with their car or computer. When they get nervous in public speaking. When they don't get a joke. When they're pee shy and other guys notice it. Okay. What the hell is taking you so long? Okay. When they have premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction. Look at that one. When in the presence of other men, they feel dominated by women. And that one, I think, is what happened because the Hulk's right there in that scene. Interesting, right? This is not what a woman who doesn't spend time in male spaces has to deal with. But when I read the thing about the NBA team, I thought about the whole like nerd checking that goes on in gaming, right? Whenever somebody makes a mistake about a detail of something, even if it's pronouncing Mario with a Canadian accent, people jump all over you. And to me, that's probably the same as that knowing sports figures, right? It's these things that you're expected to know to be properly in group, right? And we look at this stuff and it doesn't hit a button. If it's not our comparison to what you're supposed to be versus what you are, you go, that's so fucking stupid. But, you know, if you look at the way women upward socially compare, a lot of it's fucking stupid too. And that's the point. When you get distanced from it, it's fucking stupid. But it's very real, you know? And none of these things should matter. And I mean, the erectile dysfunction one, that's a sensitive subject. And I'm not trying to dismiss, you know, or downplay the sensitivity there. It just, quite frankly, it happens to everybody at some point. And that doesn't make it better, right? Because it's all this hyper competitive, you know, intragender comparison. And then you put the intergender competition on top of it. And it's a lot of stress. And it's a lot of shame because all of the metrics are just all the messaging that gets sent is that, you know, if you're not top whatever percentile, you're going to have nothing. And so when, and that's, I think, what happened with some of the She-Hulk stuff is guys felt embarrassed to like have that feminist tirade happen on what they think is like super alpha dude Hulk. And again, this is just not saying that's your reaction. I'm just saying I think that's what happened in some places. But then they tried to, because they know they're not a superhero, they know they didn't get irradiated by gamma rays and turn into the Hulk. They try to look at the regular guys in the show, and there were no regular guys on that show. There were just assholes. And, you know, I relate to that because of the whole, there's not a single woman on this show that I see myself reflected in. You know, there's guy characters I relate to, so I did that. But some people find that shameful, right? That guys aren't given social permissions to relate to Jen in that scene for numerous reasons. But part of that is the whole toxic masculinity thing, right? Like, toxic masculinity theory teaches that any traditional male ideal or behavior is bad. And that is just not true. Because, you know, one of the going back, you know, I talk about the post-war period and everything like that, but that 1950s family man archetype is very positive. But that's a traditional male value before everything got all fucked up, both through new Hollywood cinema and then like the 70s and 80s and losing faith in government and counterculture and all that stuff. Yes, more college education fucked up masculinity. Yes, it did. You know, because then it goes from that working with your hands or working in a factory and getting that sense of strength that way to this book learning, and it's not tangible. And so all the grasping at the masculine straws started. Big picture, right? Broad strokes. This is all broad strokes. And more and more and more and more, you know, you're not allowed to be traditionally masculine, so don't talk about those urges. You know, that's toxic masculinity. But all that's still being enforced because guys feel shame if they don't know what's wrong with their computer. Okay? That's not mocking the guy feeling the shame. That's me going, man, these social structures fucking suck. Because I believe that's absolutely real. I intimidate a lot of guys because I start, you know, blah, 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 computer. And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, sorry, man. Why do I know this shit? You know, like, but toxic masculinity says guys aren't allowed to express the things they believe because it's toxic, right? But then when guys actually express the more sensitive stuff, the responses don't tend to be good from men or women alike. And the more you feel like you have to hide something, the more you feel shame about it. And like I said, that came out. I became hyper aware of this with the number of guys who thought they were being great allies by writing articles about women in gaming. And oh, did I get a nasty reaction whenever I pointed out, that's nice. Your opinion on women's issues is not a substitute for a woman's opinion on women's issues. It doesn't mean it can't be there, but, you know, I'd get told by male editors, oh, I think we've done enough on that particular subject. And I said, no women have written about this subject. No women. You wrote it, male editor. You wrote the article on this. But they wanted to speak. They wanted to get all this stuff out And so, despite themselves, male editors at video game sites controlled the dialogue on women's issues. And of course, it became just hating men because it's that self-contempt coming out, right? That shame coming out. And so they elevated the feminist thinker who aligned with that. And that's why we get feminist frequency, a Pop Culture Addict as the prominent paradigm in this shit, and none of it fucking tracks. I've read the data, I've done the work, I've field tested my stuff. I worked on a show where there were women in bikinis and we interviewed porn stars, and the ratings for women were, close or on par with the ratings in men every night. And it was just every week, it was just little tweaks. We doubled our audience. Women aren't afraid of this stuff. They just want to be included in this stuff, right? I understood that you have to have women that women can relate to. As long as someone on the piece of media is being seen as good and valuable, then you can have other types of women doing other things and no one feels like it's a competition. And this is the problem when we get into superhero fiction. And this is something that took me a lot to figure out, because I glomped on to, the guys like the Hulk, and I really like Captain America and Beast, where the insides don't match the outsides, right? Or there's this transformation thing. And it's like, all right, yeah, I see where that... super soldier serum, gamma rays, Spider-Man gets bit by a radioactive spider. Marvel is, these are regular guys who through fluke got superpowers, but they started off as regular guys. And that's really not how they're increasingly seen. They're seen as, well, that's not real. I can't be that. They got fed Agent Coulson as audience proxy, and Joss Whedon killed him in an act of his own self-contempt, because let's face it, Coulson was the Whedon self-insert there. He's the same, and he puts in the same type of character, the male observer, the fanboy sidekick in everything he does. And then he killed him in a gross act of self-contempt. But oh no, his sacrifice brought the Avengers together. Oh, that's, disposable male syndrome right there, isn't it? Why couldn't he find another way? Why did it have to be through the death of the everyman? I mean, if you break this stuff down, if you spend enough attention to this stuff as you do regarding women in media, it doesn't fare that well. It doesn't fare that well. The one show that sort of does a really good job of it is The Boys, because there's enough dudes without powers, like regular dudes who are just trying to hold it together. It evolves, but guys like Huey, guys like these guys, Frenchie, guys can see themselves in those guys more than the Soups, right? And so there's a great, they can go there with the feminist messages. They can go there and it doesn't hit the threat button, because there isn't the sense of shame. Because also, let's face it, the superheroes don't seem invulnerable or perfected or someone you should aspire to be on that show. And that's why I think that show doesn't get the same reaction, except when they did a Black Lives Matter storyline, as other stuff that is really blunt instrument deconstruction of superhero genre, right? There is space. It makes it removes the shame from the everyman in the act of participation. The gameplay controls are not shitty, right? And that matters. That matters. And I do think that making stuff for men, making stuff for women That's a very important mechanic that is being missed. Except in things like, say, Alita Battle Angel. There was an example of no shame. No shame of being a regular guy in that world. There should be, in a piece of mass media, there should be no shame in being a regular guy, and no shame in being a regular girl. And then we'll have to work non-binary people in somewhere, but I maintain that, like, I'm doing okay, right? And I don't fit. I think people who don't fit have an easier time of this in some ways because we're not really locked. We're not comparing, we can go, okay, I see myself in the guys or I see myself in the girls. We don't feel forced to just identify with one or the other because of that hardwired gender identity. The same different game doesn't work the same way. But this is something we can do about, if I'm right, and I could be totally wrong, but I hope I'm at least partially right. Because if I'm right, we can reduce these backlashes, which again, the emotional reaction is valid. What people are doing with it is instructive, but it's a shame response. It's a shame response, and that's why it's so vomitous. We can turn the shame dial down, and this is not the same as existing to make men comfortable. No, it's not about that. You can make somebody uncomfortable without making them feel ashamed. And this is exactly what women have been talking about in the depictions of women since the 40s. But we haven't had the same discussion regarding depictions of men. And it's because we talk about spaces and we talk about aesthetics and we talk about character, but we don't talk about mechanics. And so stuff gets missed. And so we have to recognize that the culture clash that's going on right now is in part because our methodology in terms of exploring gender is off. We were observing correctly, but we weren't deducing the underlying thing going on with it. And I'm going to see, let me know what you think. And I know talking about shame is tough. I mean, obviously that's the thing about one-on-one stuff is you can express that stuff with somebody you think isn't going to judge you. And then it gives you a little bit of confidence to maybe, okay, even if you get a bad reaction later, you didn't get a bad reaction now, right? How do we talk about shame? Interesting problem, right? I mean, that's why I like examining characters. Because, like, we can talk about the cast of The Boys. We can talk about the Deep. And we don't have to talk about ourselves, right? Or we can talk about something, anything with an ensemble cast, right? The Batman Rogues Gallery, the characters on Arcane, anything where the characters are flawed and make mistakes and all that stuff. We can talk about what that character went through from a safe distance and not be totally exposing ourselves to that ridicule. The problem with that is when one person connects to a character in a way that's not the same as another person, and then you get this clash, and then the shame just comes roaring back, right? Because it's your interpretation is wrong. Your interpretation is wrong. And, me sitting here without that strong... Because I don't have a strong attachment to gender identity, I don't have that strong sense of shame in not measuring up to what that gender identity is supposed to mean. And right now, seeing what's going on, I feel like I'm in a completely privileged position. So I need data from other people who do have that really strong gender identity and are willing to talk about it. So let's see where this goes. Experiment. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Or buy a Leanna Care session one time for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. And this has been Manly Mondays.